Hello, I'm Jimmy Anderson and you're listening to OxyTalk. On today's episode, we're going to discuss the opioid crisis and whether the state or federal governments should handle the crisis based on the Constitution. The opioid crisis has become a widespread issue. Today, more than 4.5 million people are addicted to opioids. They're among the most addictive drugs in the world, and every day, 130 people die from opioids.
So most Americans have heard that the federal government regulates the distribution of opioids. This is because Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution states that the federal government has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and between states. Anti-federalists may argue that opioids aren't specifically listed within the Constitution, but since the creation of the FDA, opioids should be regulated by them. The FDA was created to regulate the food and drugs in America and to keep the population healthy. Opioids fall within this federal administration's jurisdiction, so they should be regulated by the federal government and its organizations. My final point is that the American Society of Anesthesiologists states that on average, 90 people per day die from opioids. If each state were allowed to regulate opioids differently, there would be extra variability in how many people were affected. Also, relying on 50 smaller governments to all make good decisions would be unlikely.
But that may not be the whole story. I have done some grueling research, and I think the federal perspective is all wrong. While in the past, federal grants have been used to prevent, treat, and recover from the influx of opioids into states, treatment and recovering victims is not enumerated under the Constitution. While some may argue that the federal government can call the crisis an issue of general welfare, and act under Article 1, Section 8, the issue is so deeply ingrained into local cultures that only the states have the ability to even take effective action. Interstate highways are the greatest source of traffic between states, but the opioids traveling should not qualify as interstate commerce under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 in the Constitution. In Lopez v. United States, the Supreme Court has limited power with interstate commerce. The first reason that the federal government can interfere is the channels of interstate commerce, and the second is regulating the instruments to the flow of commerce. Opioids flow into states both legally and illegally, and the nature of the crisis is so modern and unlike anything the Constitution could predict. A myriad of medical misjudgment, along with the lack of regulating the pharmaceutical industry, has propelled this issue further. While the federal government has more right to prevent the circulation of opioids between states, they have not taken action in the last 20 years that has been effective in treating this crisis. The key to restabilizing our country will be the individual states helping recover and treat their victims. The issue is so immediate, and the state is the only one who can quickly establish a structure in which the victims can get the help that they need, and should be the key players in recovery and treatment legislation.
Now that you've had a chance to hear both sides of the story, what do you think? Should the national government or state government have policy control over the opioid crisis? After much debate here in the newsroom, we believe the federal government should handle the opioid crisis because the FDA, whose job it is to protect public health, falls under federal jurisdiction. We also believe that since the opioid crisis has become a problem all throughout the U.S., it should be handled as a nation as a whole. Anti-federalists may argue that the regulation of drugs wasn't specifically listed in the Constitution, but since the creation of the FDA, it has become the federal government's duty. Thanks for joining us today. Signing off for OxyTalk, I'm Jimmy Anderson, and remember, don't do drugs and stay in school.